Welcome along to Obsession Engineering. This is my VTR 1000 SP1 RC51 and it is lovely. So I bought this one a couple of years ago. It is a UK bike, it's under 20,000 miles from new and it is almost all original. Except I like to do a few subtle modifications, and so it's had a revalved and resprung rear shock, it's had revalved fork springs with some important preload spacers, and it's had Brodick lines and a couple of other very minor modifications just to make it ride that little bit nicer. Now, I've not been doing thousands of miles on it, but I have been enjoying it when the weather's been nice, the roads are dry, and you get a chance to go out for a little bit of time to just enjoy HRC's finest work. This bike is absolutely lovely. But I have found a couple of niggles that today I'm going to try to rectify. I will admit, today it is quite fresh in the workshop, being the depths of winter in England, and so I've got my lovely warm Obsession Engineering bobble hat on. They're available in a couple of different colours, and they go very nicely with an Obsession Engineering jumper or hoodie. So if you like the channel, I would love it if you like and subscribe, but I would love it even more if you buy some merch to show me how much you love me. But being as it is actually quite cold, I'm actually going to get working, so I warm up a little bit. And the first thing we need to do is take the shock back out, because I might have gone a little bit over the top with something. So these bikes are of the absolute highest quality, except for the shock. The standard shock is a little bit pants, if I'm honest, and the biggest issue with it is on corner exit it just sort of sits back on its quite soft spring, and then the bike tracks wide and it's quite hard work to keep it sort of following the line you want in a corner. And so what I did was two things. To get the anti-squat to work a little bit more effectively, so it would hold the bike in position a bit and not just sag at the back, I fitted a 4mm spacer above the shock. And that has done wonders. The other thing I did was I changed the standard spring for a considerably stiffer spring. And now when I get on the power in the middle of the corner, instead of the bike going like that and then being hard work to do and running wide, it sits exactly where I want it and exits the corner lovely. However, my stiffer spring may be a little bit stiffer than necessary on bumpy English roads now. And so what I'm going to do today is whip the shock out and fit a slightly softer spring to see if we can get a nice compromise to make it just a little bit more pleasant to ride day to day. With the bike on an ABBA stand, so it's lifted by the swinging arm pivot, means the back wheel's got no load on it, which means the rear suspension is free to move independently. And now I can get into taking the bolts out. The top bolt for the shock is really, really easy to get to. That's going to be no problem at all. The bottom shock bolt, well, there's an exhaust in the way here, there's another bit of linkage in the way. It's slightly awkward to get to. I then decided it was easier to take the back wheel out, because with the back wheel out I can go literally straight into where the wheel would sit and get straight to the bolts for the linkage and the shock and stuff. Just makes life a little bit easier, and it's one big spindle bolt, isn't it? So, 30 seconds taking the wheel out saves a load of faffing around later. And now that everything's loose, this should, I believe, come out relatively easily. Down with the swinging arm, and we should hopefully have access out the top, which is pretty close. A lot of the time getting the shock out, well, it's awkward. Then somehow bikes play a little trick on you and make it even more difficult to put them back in. So, shock out. That wasn't too bad actually. Right, let's go to the suspension bench and see what we're doing with this next. So the spring currently fitted is 115 newtons per millimetre. So sort of what it says on the tin, it takes 115 newtons to compress 1 millimetre. And so that is a reasonably stiff spring. It is also ever so slightly different dimensions to the original, hence why it has a little spacer down there to get the preload in the range I wanted. And that definitely fixed the problem I had with the bike. But then, because it's not original, it then creates some other slight issues with the bike. And so what we're going to do is we're going to compromise a little bit. This is a standard spring. It is 95 newtons per millimetre, so it is relatively big difference there, 20% difference in spring rate, near enough. But as you can see, this one's quite long. When I originally did this project, I realised to get anything like the bike to handle, you needed to have the preload maxed out on the shock to give the bike the ride height. And when I really measured the preload, we were something silly like 24mm of preload to get the right amount of sag and bits that I wanted. And 24mm of preload actually on the shock is a lot. And so having the stiffer spring, we could run a less preload, and actually over some bumps it actually works a little bit better because you're not as heavily preloaded, so the first bit of the spring can react easier. But there does come a point where the spring is just a bit too hard. The problem with this one is, well then, it's back to standard and we don't want that. It's too soft. So we're going to run this one. Well, that's the plan anyway. But what you might notice from this is a different length to this one. It is also a different length to this one. And it's a different diameter. So I now need to machine up some collars and bits so that it actually sits correctly on the shock. So it works correctly when it's on the bike and basically does everything I need to do. So this may take a few minutes of manufacturing some parts. Last couple of little cuts to machine down our one of our spacers for one end of the spring. Just nice small cut at the end, just because I'm getting fairly close to where I need the measurement to be. Turn that off. Quick measure, beautiful, that will do nicely. So the idea of my top hat spacer is that I can slide that down the shock like that, and then I can get my spring, slide that on as well, and the top hat spacer will basically locate the spring in the right place so it doesn't rattle around and it actually puts the load properly into the preload rings at the top. And I've done the measurements so that the little extra piece here, so that one at each end compensates for the slight difference in spring length on this spring compared to the one we've taken off, and so those I can just slide back together in the spring compressor and we'll be a step closer to getting the thing back in the bike. So to get this spring preload, as I tend to measure it in race bikes, what I've done is taken the full length measurement of the spring, which is 194.6mm, and then I've fitted it to the shock and I've adjusted the preload adjuster up here because I want to be around 12mm. And what I've done is I've now got a preloaded measurement, like I measure the spring again now, and it's 12.4mm shorter than when it was out the shock, when it was just rolling loose on the bench. And so that 12.5mm, I'm pretty confident will give me a reasonable sag setting. We might actually have a slightly big sag setting depending on the linkage of the shock, the ratio of the shock link and stuff like that. But I suspect on the road that'll actually ride quite nicely. And so I will measure the sag at some point. I might need a friend to do it properly, but for now I'm pretty confident that I've got a decent preload measurement, and if I need to get the sag, I can just move the preload ring around a little bit more, and that just puts a little bit more load on the spring. And so now I'm comfortable with that, we can put it back in the bike. Slotting the shock in, it was sort of basically from this angle and slide it down and in, was actually pretty straightforward. And then, as you can see, with the back wheel not in the bike, you can get direct access into the linkage bolts and bits like that. So that was a lot easier taking the wheel out. Getting into the bottom shock bolt to actually torque it up was awkward, but I took the dog bones off. These ones I just took the bolt out and lifted them up out of the way. And then with a slightly wasted away extension bar, so my end wobbles, I could get that on and actually get it torqued up. So sometimes having a wobbly end is useful. So with the back end of the bike now finished, it's time to move on to my new throttle. So this is a G2 Ergo throttle from Speedicom in the UK. The Honda throttle, as standard, is quite a long action. And when you're riding the bike, when you're trying to get to wide open throttle, you really notice that. And so this lovely piece of billet aluminium goodness should improve my throttle connection, as in it should make that shorter. And so what we're going to do, take the bar end weight off, which is just a screwdriver job. I'm going to slide a long thin screwdriver up the inside of the grip, squirt some brake cleaner in it, and that will basically release the handlebar grip so it can slide off. And then I'm going to undo those 2 screws, take the housing apart, and remove the standard throttle tube. First 2 bits of the job, easy. Bar end came straight out, grip came off surprisingly easily. So the next bit, of course, is to release the cables on the standard plastic throttle. So I just need to sort of lift that up and get it out of that hole up there. The only problem with that is I need a reasonable amount of slack on the cable. And there is an adjuster just here. But that's wound all the way in, so that's as slack as that gets already. Which now means I need to take off the seat, undo these side panels a bit and release them, undo the front of the tank, lift the tank up, and hopefully I can get access to the throttle cables where they go onto the throttle bodies and get a bit more slack in them somewhere else. So what I was hoping was going to be the easy win of the day, 5 minutes to put a quick action throttle on. It's not working out like that, I can promise you. Right, I have the tank propped up. I would empty the tank of fuel and take it off, except my fuel sucker strainery thingy, siphon, that's the word I was looking for, that's at home. So that's not helping. So I'll prop that up, and I'm now in the game of trying to take the airbox off, which I should be able to do with the tank on, except there is a breather pipe down the bottom, which is actually screwed with like a Jubilee clip onto the airbox, but right down next to the cylinder head where it's really awkward to get to. So everything else has been very Honda on this, very sensibly accessible, except that bit. Because they clearly didn't expect you to be taking the airbox off during a service, so why would you need to make it accessible? That little Jubilee clip, that one has been the awkwardness of this bit of job. In fact, in a minute I'll move it round there so it's a bit more accessible for when we put stuff back together. And diving down here into the dark, in fact let's get a light on it, those are the adjusters for my throttle cables. So what I can do with those now is slacken everything off so I've got loads and loads of free play. Then I can change the actual throttle tube, reset my free play with a sensible amount of adjustment near the handlebar for future, and then reset it down here to get the slack exactly how I want it. That way, if I do want to make adjustment up at the handlebar, I've got the option. Fancy new G2 throttle fitted. They have actually got a quite nice sort of plastic insert in them as well, so the action is nice and smooth. I've put it so I've got a little bit of adjustment at this end and basically none at that end anymore because don't need to be able to get down there. Next thing to do then is to slide my grip back on and see how much difference this has made. So my white line to white line up there, and we need to see what it's like because it should open the throttle fully before we get to this line here, and it doesn't, it's longer. I know what's happened here. They do a tamer version of this throttle which makes the first opening of the throttle a little bit softer, which for a lot of people with SP1s might be what they want because the throttle is very responsive. It's not what I want. So I think my mate at Speedycom has sent me the wrong one, which is quite annoying. But the good news is I can actually put all the airbox and bits back together, and then when they send me the right one, I have already got the throttle slack and bits I need at this end. So old rubber isn't good, and when I did my little updates and upgrades on the bike, I fitted some hell braided brake lines. But I might have forgotten something on this side of the bike. Yep, forgot to do the clutch line. So now we're going to put a braided clutch line on it as well. And that means I need to start by taking off this lovely big left-hand side panel. So there's a couple of fasteners underneath at the bottom, fewer here, one big screw there, panel off, and then I should be able to get to the entire run of the clutch line. First part of this job though is to disconnect the old clutch line from the slave cylinder. So we'll just crack that open, I've got a little pot on the bench there, so it can drip clutch fluid, brake fluid, same thing, into my little tub. It's going to flow quite nicely until it basically empties the reservoir. All right, that's most of that out. So the next job then is up the top end to do the same thing. Disconnect the line from the master cylinder and then slot the new line in where the old line currently runs. Clutch line fitted, rubber grommets that it comes with tucked into the original keepers, so that is routed the same as the original, fits absolutely lovely. I've wiped out any old fluid out of the reservoir, and now we'll get some Motul .4 on it and we'll get it bled up. So we'll get a bit of that poured in the reservoir, and this will take a little bit of bleeding up because of course the line is completely dry. It's now basically a case of pump, release the pressure, let it pull a bit of fluid back into the master cylinder, which is already doing. I can see it going down in the level. Pump, a little bit of pressure on, open the bleed nipple, let the pressure out, then let it pull a bit more fluid into the master cylinder. And it will take a couple of minutes to pull the fluid in and push the air out, but in a clutch system you're moving considerably less fluid than you are in a brake system, so it should bleed up much quicker. In fact, that's pulling quite a lot of fluid through already. Only slight gain with this is it is an especially small reservoir, so I do need to keep topping up with my Motul. And with everything given a nice clean up, side panel back on, as I pump the clutch I can feel everything working nicely. That is another bit ticked off the list. Barring the actual correct throttle tube, that is my winter modifications for my SP1 done. I will admit, winter in England is not the time to be riding my out-and-out sports bike because I don't really want to take it out of the salt. But once the weather improves in spring, we'll be back out on the SP1 to see what difference my modifications made. So I hope you've enjoyed this instalment, and join me again soon for some more motorbike fun.